When we do a second reading, we are reading to try to get the main idea from the research article. In this reading, I'll read the methods section. Before I begin, you should pause this video, get your Cornell notes, and review the questions that we would like to have answered as we read the methods section. This will help you stay focused on the main ideas and skim over the details if you have the questions in mind. Okay, welcome back. So when we're reading the methods section, we'll want to know these basic questions. Who were the subjects? So were they animals? Were they humans? In other words, who was being studied? Who were the participants? And with people, we'll want to know were they adults or children, and if one gender was being studied. We'll also want to know what the experimental design was, if it was an experiment. What does that mean? That means there was one group that was given some kind of treatment, and there was a control group that was observed. Or we'll want to know if the experimental design was observational. So who was being observed and how were they being observed? We can find that information in the design of the study. We'll also want to know how the variable or how the condition that was being studied, how was it measured? So what measurements or assessments were used? And finally, we'll want to look at the statistics. What kinds of tests did they run on those measurements to show that there was some kind of difference? Okay, with that in mind, let's begin the reading. So methods. Before we begin reading, let's just look at the subheadings to get an idea of how this detailed section is organized. We can see subheadings such as subjects. So, who was being studied? Because we already know this was an experimental design, we know that there was one group, the test group, that received a supplement, vitamin D. So we'll want to learn more about how that was administered or the dose. Here we have our study design and assessments. So how was the treatment measured? Underneath that heading, skim for subheadings. They will name the assessments that were used. So here we can see an aberrant behavioral checklist. So a checklist of behavior. We will see a second assessment, the social responsiveness survey or scale, and the developmental disabilities children's global assessment scale. We'll see a fourth, a biochemistry assessment, and statistics, how the data was analyzed. Okay, that gives us a good idea of how this section is organized before we start to read in more detail. Okay, usually under the subheading of methods, the researchers will tell us as the reader that they received approval and permission by the participants to be a part of the study. We don't need to write that down. Let's go straight to our first question. Who were the subjects? So, subjects. Autism spectrum disorder children were recruited from pediatric, neurodevelopmental, and general outpatient clinics. So they were from outpatient clinics. These were children that did not live in the hospital, as well as through community ASD services. So again, ASD children. Inclusion criteria, that means who was included. Inclusion criteria included clinician-diagnosed ASD. So all of these subjects had been diagnosed with ASD. Okay, and then we'll get some more details about that we don't need to read about. And when we just skim this section, which is telling us how they were diagnosed, we'll keep skimming until we get to aged. Age, okay. They were children under 18 years old and medically stable. So there we have the information about subjects. Earlier in the abstract, we were told how many. Okay, exclusion criteria means who was not included. We can read that, but that's a detail. We don't need to read that now. We have the main idea of the subjects. So let's move down. Supplements. So again, this was a study on vitamin D3. So let's read, focused on learning more about how the vitamin D3 was administered. At the baseline, at the start of the study, parent guardian was provided with 8 bottles of drops containing either vitamin D3 or an identical placebo. Placebo means it looked like the vitamin D bottles, but the substance inside had no vitamin D. Okay, that's what placebo always means. It means there's no medicine in it, even though it looks like a normal pill or medicine. So, to review, okay, each parent was provided with 8 bottles of drops containing either vitamin D or a placebo in a double-blind, randomized, age and gender balanced ratio. So we learn more that both genders were involved. We could put that under subjects if we like. Okay, let's save the idea of the research design under the study design. For now, let's just keep our focus on the supplement. So 8 bottles of either the vitamin D or the placebo. Okay, and let's learn more about how it was administered. Okay, so come skim until you read more about the supplements. And we have a sentence here about the supplements. So let's read this sentence. Parents and guardians were instructed to administer 20 drops daily for 20 weeks to their child with food. Okay, so that was what the test group and the control group were told to do. The test group had vitamin D. The control group had a placebo. Okay, more details about the supplement. Okay, so we learn, if we do some skimming, we've already learned that it was done in winter. And where vitamin D is low. We've learned that because of the northern latitude. Okay, we get some more details. Let's just focus on the main idea for now. We have the information about the supplements. It was given in winter, and it was given, the parents were instructed to give it. Let's look at the study design. Okay, the study design. The most important sentence will be the beginning of this paragraph. So this was a parallel, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial and involved 2 clinic visits. Okay, randomized means the subjects, the children, were put in either the test group or the control group randomly. That's important so that we can say that the effect was caused by the vitamin D. Double-blind. Double-blind means the children and the parents and even the attending physicians and the researchers, they did not know if each child was taking the placebo or the vitamin D. This is important to prevent bias because there's no expectations. They would know later because they would use some kind of software to give each participant a code, and only after they collect the results they would find out. Okay, that's what double-blind means. So they give us more information, some details about when they were recruited, but we have here, okay, recruitment occurred, and then we have with a follow-up visit 20 weeks later. That's part of the design, how long the study was. So we have baseline, then for 20 weeks they took vitamin D, and 20 weeks later they came back for a follow-up visit. All assessments, all measurements were conducted at the baseline. So the measurements we saw below that we'll read about, they were conducted at the start and 20 weeks later at the follow-up. Okay, that's our basic research design. We have more information here. So following completion of day 1, following those first assessments, the subjects were randomized. They were put randomly to a vitamin D or a placebo group. Okay, we often call that the test group and the control group. The test group will receive the drug. And here we see using online randomization. Okay, that's how it stayed blind. Assessments. We used a combination of commonly used parental and clinician subjective autistic measure. When you see subjective measure, that means a survey. Okay, so if your article has subjective measure, it means a survey. So let's repeat that. We used a combination of subjective measures and biochemical. Okay, a biochemical test. And we can see the three names. Checklist. Okay, the ABC, a 58-item scale, filled out, if we read further, by the parents. If we come down, the second one, we just want to skim it. Okay, we have the name, and it's another common scale. The third one, we have the name, and we have in the first sentence that it's a clinician-rated scale. So 2 surveys completed by the parents on behavior, and 1 survey completed by the clinician. And if we skim for some keywords here, we can see that it's about functioning, and we have some of these subscales. Okay. The fourth assessment was biochemistry, a blood test. And we can expect that they would be measuring vitamin D. So let's look for that. Okay, we can see venous blood samples at the beginning of the sentence. And at the beginning of the sentence, we assessed vitamin D status by measuring total serum, and we have our unit. Okay, the other points are details. Now, statistics, okay, how we analyzed this. This will be hard for you to read, but basically we'll want to see what they tried to test through their statistics. So we'll scan for it, and I'm looking for some word about differences between the groups. Okay, and I can see the word differences, so I'm going to read this sentence. Paired t-tests were used to assess differences within the group. Within the group means in one group, from the baseline to the end, so before and after the treatment. Okay, and we have more information here. Unpaired t-tests were used to assess differences between the groups, between the test group and the control group. Okay, there's our overview. And if we look back, we can see a flow chart that will help us visualize the text. So take a look at the flow chart and then complete your Cornell notes.